200 tasks, every single one of them green, on time, exactly where the plan said it would be, and the project still delivers late. That's not a trick question. It's the single most expensive thing experienced project managers get wrong on this exam, because only a handful of those 200 tasks can actually make you late. The rest carry slack you can burn without moving the finish by a single day. And there's one word buried in PMI's own exam outline that proves a Gantt chart isn't a schedule. Most people read right past it. I will put it on the screen before we're done.
Here's the reframe that fixes all of it. A schedule isn't a drawing you finish once and hang on a wall. It's a model. A living model of how the work actually connects.
And that word model isn't decoration. Gantt drew bars against a calendar. What he didn't draw was the logic underneath, which task physically can't start until another one finishes. That logic, the network, is what the critical path method added decades later. It was born on chemical plant shutdowns in the 1950s, where a single extra day of downtime cost a fortune, and somebody finally asked which tasks actually controlled the restart.
The difference isn't academic. A Gantt chart with no logic will happily let you drag one bar 2 weeks earlier and cheerfully show you a finish 2 weeks sooner on a task that physically can't start until the one before it's done. The chart lies without blinking. The network doesn't let you.
Welcome back. This is the process domain, the technical heart of the whole exam and 41% of everything they test, and we're on task 8, plan and manage schedule. One heads up before we start. PMI splits scheduling across 2 skills. Today is the predictive side, the network, the critical path, and how you compress a plan. The agile side, story points and sizing a backlog, gets its own episode next. Predictive today.
And the reason we even call the bar chart a Gantt chart is this man. Henry Gantt, around 1910. He gave the world a clean way to draw work against time, and more than a century later, every scheduling tool you have ever opened is still drawing his chart. But here's the catch, and it's the whole episode. Gantt's chart shows you when things are planned. It doesn't tell you which of those bars actually controls the finish date. 2 projects can have identical-looking charts and completely different risk, because the connections underneath the bars are different.
So hold 4 ideas and we'll spend the whole video on them. The critical path is the chain that decides your end date. Float is the slack everything else has. Compression is how you legally shorten the plan. And the baseline is the model you defend when reality moves.
The stakes aren't abstract because a schedule is a promise with your name on it. When it slips, somebody pays. A product misses a launch window. A contract triggers a penalty. A team gets marched into a death march to hit a date that was never real. Getting this right isn't exam trivia. It's the difference between a plan you can stand behind and a number you quietly hope comes true.
And that last word, defend, is doing a lot of work. Nobody argues with a Gantt chart. They argue with you the day the schedule slips and the sponsor wants to know why. What you defend in that room is the model, not the picture. And if all you have is a picture, you lose that argument.
Which is exactly why the experienced instinct backfires here. In the real world, when you fall behind, you push everyone to work harder. On the exam, that reflex quietly loses points because it treats every task as if it matters equally to the finish. They don't.
There's a second version of the same mistake, just as common. The status meeting where every task is reported the same way, green, yellow, red, with no idea which reds can hurt you. A red task with 3 weeks of float is a shrug. A yellow task on the critical path is a fire. If your report can't tell those 2 apart, it's decoration, not information.
The entire skill, the thing PMI is really testing, is judgment about where your attention belongs, not working harder. Knowing which 40 tasks out of 1,000 can actually move your date, and letting the other 960 look after themselves for a while.
If you want to actually practice this instead of just nodding along, everything we teach has free practice questions and study material waiting at certs.professorerica.com. Drill it after the video. Leo, before we open the network up, give people the one question this whole episode has to answer.
Gladly, and it's not the one people expect. When a project is running late, what can you actually shorten to pull the finish date back? Hold that question because the answer is smaller than you think.
Real quick, because this next part matters to you. If any of this is helping, tap that like button, then hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next one finds you. Both are free and take about a second, but they tell the algorithm to show this to one more person who needs it. To pull this apart properly, we've Professor Voss with us today. She is here to help us pressure test the answers. So let me pay off Leo's question straight away. When a project is late, most people start squeezing whoever looks busiest. That instinct is exactly why they lose the point.
Let me make this physical before we get technical. Picture cooking a big Sunday roast for people arriving at 6. The roast is the long pole. 3 hours in, start to carve, and nothing you do speeds it past that. The potatoes take 20 minutes, the salad 10, the bread 5. Every one of those short jobs has slack. You can start the salad at 5:40 and still be perfectly fine. So the roast is the critical path. It, and only it, decides when everyone eats.
Okay, push on that for me. If I'm running behind, why can I not just rush the salad and the bread to catch up?
You can't, and that's the whole trap. Rushing the salad saves you nothing, because the salad was never what you were waiting on. Dinner still lands when the roast is done. If you genuinely want to eat earlier, you have to shorten the roast itself. The critical path is the only thing that moves the finish.
So in schedule language, the critical path is the longest chain of dependent tasks through the network. And here's the line that breaks people's brains the first time they meet it. The longest path is the shortest possible time the project can finish. Longest path, shortest duration, same sentence.
Because that phrase means nothing until you can see it. Let me draw the network itself. 5 activities to launch a product. Design flows into build. Then build splits into 2 parallel paths. One is testing, 4 weeks. The other is documentation, 2 weeks. Both have to finish before launch. Add the chains up. Design plus build plus the 4-week test path is the longest chain in the whole network. That's your critical path. The documentation path is shorter, so it's carrying 2 weeks of slack, of float, sitting quietly inside it.
And float has a precise meaning. 2 of them, actually. Total float is how long an activity can slip without pushing the project's finish date. Free float is tighter, how long it can slip without delaying the very next task after it. 2 different questions, and the exam will make you pick the right one.
You get those float numbers from 2 passes across the network, which the exam loves. A forward pass runs left to right and gives you the earliest each task can start and finish. A backward pass runs right to left and gives you the latest it can start and finish without slipping the end. The gap between the 2, late start minus early start, is the float. And where that gap is 0, total float is 0, you're standing on the critical path.
One thing worth naming, because the exam hides answers in it. Those arrows between tasks aren't all the same. The default is finish to start. One finishes before the next begins. But you also get start to start, where 2 things kick off together, and finish to finish, where they have to end together. And there's a 4th, start to finish, that's so rare its main job is to be a wrong answer on your exam.
And you can bend those relationships with a lead or a lag. A lag is deliberate waiting time. Pour concrete, then wait 3 days for it to cure before you build on it. That 3-day gap is a lag baked into the dependency. A lead is the opposite, letting a task start a little early, overlapping into the one before it. Hold on to leads actually, because that's fast tracking in miniature, and it comes back at the end.
Not every dependency is a law of physics, which is where judgment enters. Some are mandatory, hard logic, you truly can't test software you haven't written. Others are discretionary, a preferred order your team chose but could change under pressure. When you fast track later, the discretionary ones are the safe places to overlap. The mandatory ones will punish you for trying.
Give me a number, Erica. In that 5-activity network, how many activities are actually on the critical path?
All but 1, 4.
3. Design, build, test. Documentation sits off to the side with its float, and that ratio scales up. On a real plan of 1,000 tasks, the critical path might be 40 of them, which means the other 960 carry slack, and chasing them to catch up does absolutely nothing to your date.
There's a reason this looks like plumbing, by the way. This whole way of drawing work came out of one program. 1958, the Navy's Polaris missile, 250 prime contractors, 9,000 subcontractors, and a deadline nobody believed was possible. They invented a technique called PERT for one job, to find the single chain of tasks that controlled the entire timeline, so they knew where to point everything they had.
Wait, crash the test path enough, and doesn't documentation become...
Then documentation becomes your longest path, exactly. The moment you shorten the critical path far enough, a different path becomes the critical one. It's not a fixed thing you find once and forget. It moves as the plan moves, and that's precisely what trips experienced people up.
Float isn't really the tasks to spend.
Right, float belongs to the project, not to whoever is standing on it. If an early task burns 3 weeks of slack because nobody was watching, the task that needed that slack later has none left. That's how a non-critical task quietly becomes critical, and nobody saw it coming.
So the whole game is knowing which chain controls the date and protecting it. Everything else is noise you can afford to ignore, right up until it stops being noise.
Okay, you can see the network now. But where do the durations on it actually come from? Because a critical path built on garbage estimates is just garbage with a confidence problem.
4 ways to estimate, roughest to sharpest. Analogous, this project looks like the last one, so call it 3 months. Parametric, math from a known rate, 1,000 square feet at 2 days each. Bottom up, estimate every small piece and add them up. And 3-point, where you deliberately hedge the uncertainty instead of pretending it away.
And 3-point is the one the exam reaches for constantly, because it fights the optimism that wrecks schedules. You give 3 numbers, not 1. The optimistic case, the most likely case, and the pessimistic case. Then you weight the middle one heavily. Take the optimistic, add 4 times the most likely, add the pessimistic, and divide the whole thing by 6. A task that's 10 days if you're lucky, 12 most likely, and 20 if it goes sideways doesn't estimate at 12. Run it. 10 plus 4 times 12 is 48, plus 20 is 78. Over 6, 13 days. That extra day, 12 to 13, is the pessimistic tail pulling your honest estimate outward, and it's exactly the day optimists lose.
Notice what that gives you. Not just a number, but a sense of the risk in the number. A task where optimistic and pessimistic are miles apart is a task you should be nervous about no matter how nice the average looks.
And that spread is where reserves come from, which people constantly get backwards. Contingency reserve is for the known unknowns, the risks you identified, and it lives inside your baseline, inside the number you commit to. Management reserve is for the true surprises, the unknown unknowns, and it sits outside the baseline, in the sponsor's pocket, released only if something nobody planned for actually happens.
So the honest schedule isn't a single confident line, it's your best estimate, plus contingency you own for the risks you can name sitting under a management reserve you don't control. Padding every single task in secret, on the other hand, isn't a reserve, that's just lying with extra steps, and it makes the whole plan impossible to defend.
You don't estimate the whole thing to the same depth on day 1 either. That's rolling wave planning. The work in the next few weeks gets estimated in fine detail. The work 6 months out stays deliberately coarse, because pretending to know it precisely is false precision you'll only have to redo. You sharpen it as it comes into view.
The estimate is honest about its own uncertainty. Good. Now show them the proof, Erica, that this is a model and not a drawing.
Now, here's that word I promised you at the very top. The one that proves a Gantt chart isn't a schedule. It's sitting right in PMI's own exam outline, in the schedule task. Baseline a project schedule. And read the line right under it, analyze schedule variation. You don't just draw the plan. You freeze an approved version of it, the baseline, and from that moment on you measure what actually happens against it. A drawing can't have variance, a model can. That's the entire difference, and PMI put it in writing.
And notice the enabler above it too. Prepare a schedule based on the selected development approach. That's the split we mentioned. Predictive builds a network and a baseline. Adaptive sizes a backlog. Same task, 2 ways in, which is exactly why story points are their own episode next time.
All of this lives inside a plan for the plan, the schedule management plan. It's where you write down the rules of the game up front. What tool you're using, what units, how much variance is allowed before anyone has to act, and who gets to approve a change to the baseline. Decide that before the pressure hits, not in the meeting where the date is already slipping.
And salt the whole thing with milestones. A milestone is a zero-duration marker, no work, no length, just a flag that says this significant thing is now done. Permit approved, integration complete. They're how a sponsor reads a schedule without reading 400 tasks, and how you spot a slip early because a missed milestone is visible from across the room.
So the baseline is protected. You don't quietly redraw it every time a task slips a day.
Correct. If a change is real and approved, it goes through change control and you rebaseline on purpose. Otherwise, the thing you're measuring against is a moving target, and your variance numbers become meaningless. A baseline you keep secretly nudging isn't a baseline. It's a comfort blanket.
There's one more thing that can move your critical path, and it's not the network at all, it's people. Resource leveling. If the same engineer is booked on 2 critical tasks at once, something has to give, and leveling pushes one of them out to fix the overallocation. That can stretch your critical path, or even hand the title to a different chain entirely.
Its gentler cousin is resource smoothing, which only moves tasks around inside their existing float so it never pushes the finish date. That's the exam distinction in one breath. Leveling can change your end date because it will break a hard resource conflict at any cost. Smoothing refuses to touch the date and just tidies the peaks and valleys within the slack you already have.
And the payoff for all that discipline is real. Go back to Polaris for a second. That program actually delivered years early, and this is the submarine that was built around the missile the whole schedule pointed at. The plan held because they managed the one chain that mattered and protected it from everything screaming for attention.
That's the quiet version of success, and it never trends. A schedule that held because somebody defended the model week after week against 100 reasonable-sounding reasons to quietly move it.
Now the exam's favorite move. The project is late, or a deadline just moved in on you, and you have to pull the finish date back. There are exactly 2 legal ways to do it, and picking the wrong one is how experienced managers blow up their own project trying to save it.
Way 1, crashing. You throw money and resources at critical path tasks to shorten them. More people, overtime, a second shift, a faster supplier. Crashing always costs more, and you only ever crash the critical path, because shortening anything else is spending real money to move a date that was never going to move. You crash in a specific order, cheapest time first. Say you need to buy back 2 weeks. Look at the numbers on the critical path, not the whole plan. Crash the test task first, $10,000 for a week, because it's the cheapest week you can buy. Then the build task, $25,000 for the next. $35,000, 2 weeks off your finish. You never crash the design task, even if it's cheaper, because it's sitting off the critical path with float. Spending there buys you nothing.
Way 2, fast tracking. You take tasks that were planned in sequence and overlap them. Start building before the design is fully signed off. Fast tracking is free, it costs no extra money at all, but it buys the time with risk, because now you're building on a design that might still change, and if it changes, you're tearing out finished work and redoing it.
Put them side by side, Erica. Crashing adds cost, and it holds your risk flat. Fast tracking is the mirror image, no added cost, but it adds rework risk. One shortens the critical path by spending money. The other overlaps sequential work by taking a gamble. Same finish pulled in, 2 completely different bills.
Which one do I reach for first?
Which are you shorter on, budget or nerve? That's the real question. If you have money and no appetite for risk, you crash. If you have no budget but the tasks can genuinely overlap, you fast track. Different constraint, different tool. The exam is testing whether you match the technique to what you're actually short on.
And there's a smart way to fast track and a reckless way. Remember those discretionary dependencies from earlier, the order your team chose rather than the order physics forced? Those are the safe places to overlap. You fast track a preferred sequence, not a mandatory one. Overlap the tasks that only look sequential and leave the ones that truly are.
You don't fire and forget. When you fast track, you watch the overlapped work like a hawk, because the whole bet is that the earlier task won't change under you. The moment it does, you want to catch the rework while it's small, not discover it 3 tasks downstream when it's expensive.
Fast tracking has a famous face, actually. The Chrysler Building, 1930. It went up in about 16 months, roughly 4 floors a week, while a rival tower was racing it for the title of world's tallest. The Chrysler team built a 125-foot spire in secret, inside the building, and raised it in about 90 minutes to steal the record. That's fast tracking in one image. Overlapping work, hiding the risk, and racing a clock.
That's why I fast track every time. It's free, so why ever pay?
Because free is a lie you pay for later. Fast tracking isn't free, it's borrowed. You pay it back in rework and defects if the thing you overlap changes on you. On a low uncertainty task, overlap all day. On a task that's still being figured out, fast tracking is just a way to build the wrong thing faster.
And crashing has a hard floor too, before you fall in love with it. In the Second World War, they crashed shipbuilding to the absolute limit, prefabricating sections in parallel all over the country. One Liberty ship, the Robert E. Peary, went from keel laid to launched in 4 days. 4 days against a 50-day average. But that was a stunt to prove a point, not a repeatable plan. Push crashing too hard and quality and safety start to crack. There's a point where more people and more money stop buying you any time at all.
There's also a third school of thought worth a sentence, because a scenario can hint at it. The critical chain method. Instead of padding every task, you strip the padding out, gather it into one protective buffer at the end of the critical chain, and add smaller feeding buffers where side paths join it. It's resource aware, and it's trying to solve the exact problem leveling exposes people, not just logic, deciding your date.
When a scenario gives you ranges instead of single numbers and asks how confident you're in a date, that's your cue for a Monte Carlo simulation. It runs the whole network thousands of times, sampling every task's 3-point range, and hands you a probability. Not a promise of the 15th, a 70% chance of the 15th. Confidence, not a date.
So the honest verdict: crashing spends money and keeps your risk flat. Fast tracking spends risk and keeps your budget flat. And both of them only ever touch the critical path, because that's the only chain that can move your date. Professor Voss, thank you. That was exactly the pressure I wanted on it. Last word is yours.
Glad to help. Just hold the one line and you'll get these right. Crashing spends money, fast tracking spends risk, and you never ever compress a path that wasn't going to make you late in the first place.
Fast round. What actually drives your end date?
The critical path.
The longest chain of dependent tasks.
And if it's late, what can you shorten?
Only the critical path. Nothing else moves the date.
Crash it or fast track it.
Crashing costs?
Money.
Fast tracking costs.
Risk. Rework, specifically.
Here's the picture to carry into the room. One slider. All the way left, you compress by spending money. All the way right, you compress by taking on risk. Every real decision is somewhere on this line, and where you land depends on what you're short of.
2 quick drills. 1. A test task on the critical path slips a week. What happens to the finish?
It slips a week too. 0 float, remember.
2. A task with 3 weeks of float slips 1 week. Finish date?
Unchanged. It just ate one of its 3 weeks of slack.
1 more, harder. You crash the critical path by 2 weeks. Are you done? Worry.
No. Check whether another path just became critical. Compression moves the target.
That's the one that separates people. Then the leveling trap sitting right on top of it. You fix an over-allocated engineer, resolve the workload conflict, and your finish date slips even though no single task ever got
bigger, because leveling can push the critical path out. Smoothing never would.
Different tool, different promise. Smoothing stays inside the float and protects the date. Leveling breaks the resource conflict at any cost, and sometimes the date is the cost.
2 questions and a couple of traps, and that's honestly most of what the exam wants from you here. Where is the slack, where is there none, and what quietly moves the line when you're not looking?
And the number to sit with. On a 1,000 task plan, maybe 40 tasks are on the critical path. 40. Those are the ones that can make you late.
Carry two things out of here above everything else. First, the critical path is the longest chain of dependent tasks, and it's the only thing that can move your finish date. Protect it and recheck it every time you compress, because it moves. Second, you shorten it exactly two ways. Crashing spends money and holds your risk. Fast tracking spends risk and holds your budget.
Everything you draw gets frozen into a baseline you then defend. A drawing can't have variance. A model can. That's the difference between a schedule and a pretty chart. And next time, the other half of this task, the adaptive side, story points, sizing a backlog, estimating without a network.
If this made the schedule click, subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep making these. And the free practice questions are waiting at search.professorerica.com. Go earn the pass.
Before you close the tab, one question for you. What is the one task that quietly ran the whole timeline on your last project? Tell us in the comments.
For everyone building the plan that has to survive contact with reality, keep it honest and keep it defended. See you in the next one.